Hey everyone, I've decided to make some cabinets for my kids' playroom. I have several pieces of pre-finished maple plywood from our kitchen remodel, and my goal is to not go out and buy another sheet. I'll need to buy wood for my doors and my face frames, but that isn't nearly as costly as the nice cabinet plywood. These cabinets are going to be similar to upper cabinets you would find in a kitchen. The four I'm working on in this video will be about a foot deep, 30 inches tall, and 21 inches wide once the face frame is on. It always makes me happy when I can use up scrap, and trimming some of these to size and only having to toss a skinny board into the burn bin was very satisfying, especially since a full sheet of this pre-finished plywood is about 90 bucks. Using pre-finished plywood is worth the extra cost to me, but it does force you to approach your assembly with a bit more consideration since you can't glue to the pre-finished surface. So for me, I find that cutting in dados and rabbets is a must, but it also makes the assembly that much smoother, so it's worth the extra time and planning. I have the Dado set, which I would highly recommend. I've been using this same set for about 5 years now, and they are still sharp and still accurate. The real thing of note here are my zero clearance table saw inserts. They're made by Lee Craft and can be used for dados or regular blade. I have two, one for both applications. I've made my own insert in the past, but it's a real pain to make them for this rigid table saw. These things fit perfect, well worth the money. I highly recommend them, and I'll make sure to put a link for these up in the description. When I'm cutting dados or rabbets, I like to try and use a feather board, though it might have been a bit overkill in this situation. Since I'm using a sacrificial fence, I just clamp on my feather boards, and they tend to work well enough for me. I mean, the whole point of using them is to keep the wood pressed down to the blade, and they serve their purpose. What I do find really useful, though, are my bar gauges for testing the depth of my rabbets and for setting up certain widths. I'll put a link for those in the description too. I was getting really good cuts, but I did have to run it through twice to clean up a sliver that wasn't being cut off the ends. You can actually see it shoot out the back sometimes when I'm running through that second cut. Now, for the top of the cabinet, I'm using rabbets because the top will just sit down in. But for the bottom shelf, I didn't want to use a rabbet on the bottom because then there's no plywood on the side supporting it. So I moved my fence over a ½ inch and made sure my dado stack was the right thickness for the plywood, and it was a perfect fit. So after getting the dados cut, I wanted to put a rabbet in the back of each of the four boards for a back panel to sit into. I'm using ½ inch plywood for the back panel, so I'm just making a ½ inch rabbet. And I'm using those brass bar gauges again to help me get that ½ inch. So I run a test piece through and I get a really good result. That is the ½ inch plywood I'm going to be putting in as the back panel, and it's a really good fit. I'm not sure about you guys, but for me, I'm pretty sensitive to dust, which is tough being a woodworker. And this sawdust is really tough on me. So I wear my heavy duty face mask the whole time. Even though I'm not making that much sawdust right now, I pretty much wear it during the whole project. Now for these cabinets, I plan on attaching face frames. I like to attach face frames with pocket hole screws instead of face nailing. So to make my life easier, I put those pocket holes in before I assemble the cases. Another thing I like to do before the case is assembled is to drill the holes for adjustable shelf pins. The risk you run doing this ahead of time is not aligning your left and right sides correctly, so I took a minute and I made a jig that fell into the dado that the bottom shelf will rest in to know where to hold my jig. So I pretty much made a jig to use my jig. When I start to assemble this case, I use glue, brad nails, and screws. The glue is what really does the work. Brad nails kind of hold it together when I'm in between that glue and screw stage, and the screws are like a mechanical clamp where I don't actually need to pull out all my big bar clamps. I will drill like a little hole from the inside of a rabbet or a dado, so I don't need to actually go around and measure. It just shows up. I know exactly where I'm going to be working. Another recent purchase were these Star Drive 1.5-inch screws I got off Amazon. I like to buy in bulk to save money, and since I couldn't get more than a small container at my local hardware store, I decided to give these a try. I can get 75 of these for $7 where I live, but I was able to get just shy of 1,000 for $37, so more than twice as many for the same price. So here you're going to get to see a couple good shots of the size of my shop. It's not overly big, about the size of a one-car garage, and it's in my basement, so breaking down full sheets of plywood is tough. Fortunately for this project, I didn't have any full sheets of plywood. Everything was scrap. Just the back panel was the closest thing to a full sheet. It was still 4 feet wide, and I think it was 57 inches long. And as a matter of fact, the back panel was a little short from what I had designed, so after I cut my pieces, I actually added a little bit of poplar to the end of the plywood. You can just see it in the top right corner there. You don't see it really when the cabinet is assembled, and because it was just poplar, it glued up well. Not the best camera angles here, but I do fasten the back panel in with brad nails and glue, which wipes out really easily on the pre-finished side. So my shop's not big enough to really get a full screen picture of all the cabinets unless I go out towards my door. But that's me walking in, and you can see the 4 cabinets I made. I'll have to do 1 more cabinet or 2 smaller cabinets before I start my face frames and doors. If you like my video, give me a thumbs up and please subscribe.